In collusion with the world's most powerful people, the heads of our governments have enacted a 10-year transition to a universal political system called Stakeholder Capitalism.
It's a funeral of shareholder capitalism, and it's a birth of stakeholder capitalism.
You have shown us the way forward.
My name is Richard Jeffs. I'm a former TV producer and now a tech entrepreneur.
In this series, I discover what stakeholder capitalism is and how its inclusive and sustainable policies are changing our society.
Black Lives Matter!
Black Lives Matter! Make some noise if you think that trans rights are human rights.
People are dying, children are starving, families are fleeing their homes.
And I explore an initiative called the Great Reset of Capitalism for transitioning us to full stakeholder capitalism by 2030.
The World Economic Forum is now very much engaged into this initiative of shaping a great reset.
This is a time for a great reset.
Reset the ways in which we live.
Join me as I investigate the Great Reset transition to stakeholder capitalism.
History is truly at a turning point. Global energy systems, food systems, and supply chains will be deeply affected.
This is Klaus Schwab. He's the executive chairman of the World Economic Forum, an exclusive organization for the world's most influential people.
Around 1/3 of the members are CEOs of multinational companies, 1/3 are leaders of international organizations and governments, and 1/3 are from civil society, forming a truly multi-stakeholder community.
His members include powerful heads of state, from Joe Biden and Keir Starmer to the President of the People's Republic of China.
We are working closely together with governments from around the world, including all G20 countries.
This is a meeting of major world leaders who are deciding the future of the planet.
50 years ago, Klaus Schwab launched the World Economic Forum with a mission to transition the world to another political system that he designed called stakeholder capitalism.
In 1970, as a young professor at the University of Geneva, I pioneered the stakeholder concept. As a consequence, I created the forum as a not-for-profit foundation.
Despite support from influential politicians and royals, Klaus Schwab has been unsuccessful in enacting stakeholder capitalism. But his network has since grown.
Over the last 50 years, I have further developed the stakeholder concept into a global business citizenship.
Klaus Schwab has now become one of the most powerful people on the planet, enabling him in 2020 to finally fulfill his mission.
Today, the concept of stakeholder capitalism is finally becoming mainstream.
2020 marks a monumental time in our history. Led by this controversial figure, the world's most powerful people are colluding in an undemocratic transition to another political system.
We are talking about a substantial shift which is taking place to an economy which is more based on stakeholder responsibility.
Despite our governments and the media being partners of the World Economic Forum, no one has informed us.
This transition is happening undemocratically and discreetly.
So what is stakeholder capitalism? In his book, Klaus Schwab explains stakeholder capitalism replaces the two political systems used by countries around the world.
Concretely, from a system of shareholder capitalism, which prevailed in the West in the past 50 years, and a system of state capitalism that gained prominence in Asia and is centred on the primacy of the state, we should move to a system of stakeholder capitalism.
Up until 2020, when stakeholder capitalism was globally enacted, our lives throughout the West have been shaped by shareholder capitalism.
Referred to as free market capitalism, shareholder capitalism provides company owners, called shareholders, the freedom to trade without intervention from the government.
In countries such as China, however, freedom is surrendered to the state.
Often referred to as communism, state capitalism restricts companies' freedom to trade by granting authority to the state.
In an interview with Asian media, Klaus Schwab explains which existing system he prefers.
On the one hand, we have state capitalism. On the other hand, we have shareholder capitalism. So it's a clash between two systems. I believe that state capitalism in the short term provides certain advantages.
If shareholder capitalism provides us shareholders' control and state capitalism shifts control to the state, it's easy to understand who acquires control under stakeholder capitalism.
Stakeholder capitalism replaces both shareholder and state capitalism with a single global political system that provides authority to a group of people called stakeholders.
It's a funeral of shareholder capitalism, and it's the birth of stakeholder capitalism.
You have shown us the way forward.
Who, therefore, are the stakeholders who acquire such unprecedented global authority?
Throughout his book, Klaus Schwab insists we are all stakeholders under stakeholder capitalism, and his new political system benefits all people and the planet. Hidden, however, in a World Economic Forum blog, Klaus Schwab explains who really acquires the authority.
To ensure that both people and the planet prosper, 4 key stakeholders play a crucial role. They are governments, civil society, such as education bodies, companies, and the international community, such as the UN and European Union.
The heads of these organisations are exclusive elite members of the World Economic Forum.
Stakeholder capitalism positions these billionaire bureaucrats and dangerous dictators as a global government with authority over all people and the planet.
If I look at our stakeholders, we have business, of course, then we have politics, we have partnerships with many governments around the world, then of course we have NGOs, we have trade unions. Media, of course. Media, of course.
Here are Klaus Schwab's politician stakeholders, the heads of our governments, with the stakeholder capitalism slogan promoted above them at their G20 annual meeting in 2021. People and Planet is also promoted on the cover of Klaus Schwab's book about stakeholder capitalism. Back to his blog, Klaus Schwab argues his elite stakeholders will use their increased authority for our benefit, simply because they are people and make use of the planet.
All these stakeholders crucially consist of people and make use of the planet. It's no surprise then that they should want to optimize the well-being of all of us, as well as that of the environment.
One such stakeholder, who has now acquired authority across the West, is the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party, Xi Jinping.
The international community is looking to China to continue its responsible leadership.
The World Economic Forum have a large operation in China, where Klaus Schwab runs his ominous Global Future Council to
explore emerging models of Chinese leadership adapted to a new norm of globalization.
And Klaus Schwab is often interviewed by Chinese state media, where he expresses admiration for their communist system.
I respect China's achievements, which are tremendous over the last over 40 years. I think it's a role model for many countries. The Chinese model is certainly a very attractive model for quite a number of countries.
Klaus Schwab has also built a close rapport with the General Secretary of the Chinese Communist Party.
It is my distinct honor and great privilege to introduce His Excellency Xi Jinping. China has made significant economic and social achievements under your leadership.
In this World Economic Forum address, Klaus Schwab welcomes Xi Jinping as a stakeholder to govern us.
We should join hands and rise to the challenge.
And he encourages all stakeholders to enact stakeholder capitalism's inclusive and sustainable policies.
I believe this is the best time for leaders to come together and work jointly for the world to become more inclusive, more sustainable.
Black Lives Matter! Black Lives Matter!
Inclusive and sustainable are stakeholder capitalism's two primary policies. Since 2020, they are responsible for the changes we've been witnessing throughout society.
Black trans lives matter!
Inclusive policies are based upon the idea that black and trans people are oppressed, and sustainable policies are based upon the idea that climate change poses an existential threat.
Klaus Schwab claims these alleged crises are being caused by shareholder capitalism.
By transitioning to stakeholder capitalism, he alleges the world will become more inclusive of oppressed people and sustainable by eliminating climate change.
In collusion with his media, education, and corporation stakeholders, Klaus Schwab has been propagating inclusive and sustainable ideas to manipulate us into wanting stakeholder capitalism.
The world which we want to create with the Great Reset, it will have to be more inclusive.
It's a strategy that has proven effective throughout history for shifting nations to communism.
Inclusive propaganda was the primary weapon used by Mao for shifting China to communism over a 10-year period called the Cultural Revolution. Originating from a Marx and Engels idea, Mao indoctrinated young working-class Chinese to believe they were oppressed by the capitalists, encouraging them to rise up and overturn capitalism in favour of a system that he alleged was more inclusive.
You were 6 years old when the Cultural Revolution began in China.
I just want to let the American people know that what's going on in our school and in our country is really a replay of the Cultural Revolution in China.
Today, Klaus Schwab and his stakeholders are disseminating Marxist inclusive propaganda to encourage us to rise up and demand a shift to stakeholder capitalism.
Reform is not possible!
Reform is not possible!
We need to defund!
We need to defund!
I want people to see there's similarities, and the similarities are terrifying.
Instead of targeting the working class, Klaus Schwab and his stakeholders are indoctrinating our younger generation to believe minority groups across race, sexuality and gender are oppressed by shareholder capitalism.
I feel guilty that I've not done anything vocally to help the people who are oppressed, and they've been oppressed for so long.
My youngest looks very white, so they would look at her and say, "You are an oppressor."
Marxist ideas such as critical race theory and gender identity are being propagated throughout education institutions.
Books like these are now part of the curriculum.
Encouraging young people to join social justice movements that are designed to drive a shift to a system that Klaus Schwab alleges is more inclusive.
This one is A is for activist. Each letter promotes a different form of protest. N is for no, 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 no.
We have the power! We have the power!
Make some noise if you think that trans rights are human rights.
And we have seen the signs of anger on the streets. So we have to create a stronger inclusiveness.
To allegedly make the world more inclusive, Klaus Schwab's diversity, equity and inclusion policies prioritise job opportunities to those of us he claims are oppressed. By 2023, DEI policies have been embedded into thousands of companies.
It has become commonplace for companies to commit publicly to take action on advancing DEI, with 2,200 CEOs and presidents pledging to create more inclusive workplaces.
While his corporation stakeholders have been forcing these DEI policies from the top down, Klaus Schwab claims we have been driving the transition from the bottom up by joining movements,
including racial justice movements, gender equality activism, the global campaign for LGBTQIA+ rights, and the growing environmental justice movement, which have increased awareness and galvanized public action.
How do you define inclusive capitalism, specifically regarding gender, race, and ethnicity?
To make stakeholder capitalism appear more inclusive, it relies on equity policies, which are at the core of this stakeholder's presidential campaign.
When you take into account the fact that not everyone starts from the same place, particularly when we take into account race and gender.
Equitable policies place pressure on companies to employ more allegedly oppressed people, creating what Kamala Harris calls equality of outcome.
That at its core will produce the best outcome.
By increasing employment for the alleged oppressed, opportunities for the alleged oppressors will inevitably reduce, making equitable policies, by nature, discriminatory.
We are proud of the fact that equity is one of our guiding principles. Proud of the fact that we understand equality is important, but not everybody starts out on the same base. To put equity firmly at the center of our economic policy.
Here is Kamala Harris also sharing her pronouns to propagate stakeholder capitalism's inclusive ideas.
I am Kamala Harris. My pronouns are she and her. I am a woman.
Later in this series, I investigate how the Black Lives Matter co-founder was educated by Klaus Schwab on his Young Global Leaders program, and her co-founder's admission to them both being trained Marxists.
I also think that we actually do have an ideological frame. Myself and Alicia in particular are trained organizers. We are trained Marxists.
I also explore how stakeholder capitalism's inclusive policies encourage biological men to compete in female sports, and how the stakeholders have been cancelling anyone who objects, labelling them as transphobic.
I'm sure there are still people who are skeptical about this transformation.
They have to trust that the era will be inclusive for them.
During the Cultural Revolution in China, the people who Mao alleged were oppressed were promised a more inclusive society.
But many millions had suffered or died as victims of Mao's rhetoric.
But their transition away from free market capitalism inevitably made everyone severely oppressed.
All his charisma hadn't delivered the new society he'd promised.
While inclusive ideas have been weaponized by tyrants for generations to shift nations to communism, stakeholder capitalism's second policy, sustainable, is Klaus Schwab's idea.
And finally, more sustainable, because the next crisis is already waiting for us around the corner, and it is the climate crisis.
By manipulating us to fear climate change, the stakeholder sustainable propaganda is also making us want stakeholder capitalism.
No! Stop it!
Climate activists glued their hands to sports cars.
I got kids to feed!
Sorry. We demand at this year's World Economic Forum immediately and completely divest from fossil fuels. We want this done now.
His poster child and fearmonger for his climate change propaganda is Greta Thunberg.
We are less than 12 years away from not being able to undo our mistakes.
And Klaus Schwab's solution to the alleged climate crisis?
It's the decarbonization of the economy to protect us against let's say, an environmental virus.
The decarbonisation of the economy is Klaus Schwab's net zero policy.
We must accelerate its transition to net zero.
Which means banning everything that emits carbon.
The main solution is so simple that even a small child can understand it. We have to stop the emissions of greenhouse gases.
This includes our use of diesel and petrol vehicles, as well as travelling by plane.
We must change almost everything in our current societies.
Currently being enforced by Klaus Schwab's politician stakeholders around the globe, net zero removes our freedom to travel and imposes Orwellian restrictions on our lives.
It was all very jolly, laughing along as the police held Greta for the photographers.
If the police arrest someone for protesting, they don't typically stop for photos. Unless it's a propaganda stunt.
They all got the shots they wanted before the police then walked her away. It's theatre, climate theatre.
I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day.
Sustainable propaganda is designed to make us fear climate change, so we actively demand a ban on fossil fuels.
Are you more concerned about the protection of a painting or the protection of our planet and people?
And it's working. Many of us are going to extreme lengths to demand Orwellian restrictions on our freedom to travel.
Menschen frieren. Menschen sterben. Wir sind in einer Klimakatastrophe.
Conveniently for the World Economic Forum stakeholders who set the rules, net zero travel restrictions will not apply to billionaires.
Private jet emissions quadruple for a week each year due to the stakeholders flying to the World Economic Forum's headquarters in Davos to set climate change policies, emitting as much CO2 as 350,000 average cars.
You seem to be joining the establishment, not fighting them anymore. Are you not one of them?
One of who?
What, the people on the private jets and the helicopters flying in here to tell us how to live our lives? The point being, you have to condemn all of them equally, otherwise it's hypocrisy, right?
While our freedom erodes, the stakeholders reserve unrestricted freedom to travel in their private jets by purchasing carbon credits, which they claim offsets their carbon emissions.
We are grateful for your leadership on stakeholder responsibility in accelerating the transition to a sustainable market.
Like all stakeholders, the UK Prime Minister has a responsibility to accelerate the transition to Klaus Schwab's sustainable market.
We will play our full part on the international stage
obviously towards those net zero targets.
The World Economic Forum is where our leaders' loyalty lies.
You have to choose now between Davos or Westminster.
Davos.
Why?
Once you get out of Westminster, whether it's Davos or anywhere else, you actually engage with people that you can see working with in the future.
A more sustainable way of doing business that values all stakeholders.
We must forget about net zero. We need real zero.
Stop! 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 Stop!
The stakeholders' fear-mongering is manipulating us to want the climate change restrictions that Klaus Schwab is imposing under stakeholder capitalism. In a later episode, I investigate the climate change science.
This is from NASA satellite data. Temperature has gone down.
And the stakeholders' sustainable propaganda.
At no point during the past 800,000 years has atmospheric CO2 been as high as it is today.
The reason you chose 800,000 years ago is because for 200 million years before that, it was greater than it is today.
Yeah, but there weren't human beings.
So how did it get to 2,000 parts per million if we humans weren't here? Your testimony is not serious.
They were all caught by Chinese authorities who've been deploying drones equipped with high-resolution cameras and loudspeakers.
In China, how does a relatively small government violate millions of citizens' human rights without them rising up and overturning their government?
Under a statue of Mao Zedong, with their fists raised, groups of tourists recite their party oath. Committing allegiance and fidelity, they say, to observe the party's discipline and guard all its secrets, ready at all times for sacrifice.
The answer is communism can only thrive by brainwashing citizens to want it.
Outside, some 11-year-old girls were part of a video project designed to teach toddlers and kids about Mao and the party. It will make them love the country more and feel grateful to the country, she says. A tidied-up version of history is fundamental to propaganda here that attempts to shape and fortify the Communist Party's past and ensure a grip on power in its next century.
During the Cultural Revolution, Mao indoctrinated citizens into wanting communism by propagating ideas that made them angry and fearful about issues he alleged were caused by free market capitalism.
Power in numbers! Power in numbers! Power in numbers!
I'm angry at 31. You angry at 16.
Klaus Schwab's inclusive and sustainable propaganda is making us angry and fearful today.
We're angry, we're mad, we're hurt, we're afraid. But that fear is going to motivate us.
People are dying. Children are starving. Families are fleeing their homes.
Making us want his authoritarian system that's allegedly more inclusive and sustainable.
What we're seeing now through the language of the World Economic Forum, this concept of stakeholder capitalism, which really is just communism in drag.
Replacing shareholder and state capitalism, stakeholder capitalism is a universal political system that empowers the World Economic Forum's elite members, called stakeholders, with authority over all people and the planet.
Welcome to Stakeholder Capitalism, a show by the World Economic Forum exploring how economies can be made to work for people and the planet.
Since the enactment of stakeholder capitalism, we no longer live under free market capitalism, and our nations are no longer sovereign.
The stakeholder concept, and particularly the ESGs, are a very important part of getting business involved.
To force us to adopt stakeholder capitalism, Klaus Schwab has launched a corporate credit score called ESG. E stands for environment.
In this section, we receive a good score for complying with Klaus Schwab's sustainable net zero restrictions.
S stands for social.
Here, our score improves for complying with Klaus Schwab's inclusive DEI policies, requiring us to prioritise job opportunities to people who are allegedly oppressed and support social justice movements.
And G stands for corporate governance.
This means the corporation stakeholders who govern us.
You have been a fabulous partner in promoting the stakeholder concept. What you did is actually to speak out on social issues. Your support for LGBTQ rights.
In order to receive a good score, more brands are hiring ambassadors from the trans community.
This month I celebrated my day 365 of womanhood. Check out my Instagram story to see how you can enjoy March Madness with Bud Light and maybe win some money too.
And the stakeholders are supporting other inclusive policies.
Starbucks says employees will now be allowed to wear Black Lives Matter apparel as part of its dress code, and now they're even making t-shirts for them to wear.
If we do not comply to Klaus Schwab's Marxist policies, a subsequent poor ESG score will mean no more funding. The CEO of the largest money management firm in the world and considered the most powerful person on Wall Street, Larry Fink, is a World Economic Forum board trustee. BlackRock focused their investments in companies with good ESG scores.
At BlackRock, we are forcing behaviors.
That's an investment criteria for you.
If you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race, you're going to be impacted, and we're going to have to force change.
By starving non-compliant companies of funding, investor stakeholders, such as BlackRock, are forcing companies to adopt stakeholder capitalism.
This will allow investors to see how the company performs on matters such as climate change, workplace diversity and inclusion, and as a consequence, a sea change in the way companies are run.
One elite who rejected his invite to the World Economic Forum and is sounding the alarm about ESG is Elon Musk.
We don't want basically some sort of communism rebranded thing, which is like a lot of what ESG is, to be inflicted upon corporate America without the knowledge of the actual shareholders, which is what's going on. The public is being lied to.
Elon Musk tweeted, "I'm increasingly convinced that corporate ESG is the devil incarnate. People who follow the World Economic Forum often warn against it."
Elon also tweeted,
WEF is increasingly becoming an unelected world government that the people never asked for and don't want.
And
how is WEF Davos even a thing? Are they trying to be the boss of Earth?
Criticising our new boss of Earth will guarantee a poor ESG score.
Tesla, a company that makes electric vehicles, has a moderate to moderately poor score. Somehow, out of the 5 US-based automotive companies like Ford, which make gas-guzzling trucks, Tesla's ESG score is the worst. Why is that? The score is political.
What I'm particularly proud of in the case of the development of those ESG metrics is that the initiative came from business, from our 100-plus CEOs.
And his 100-plus CEOs will of course be guaranteed a good score.
So the company reigning at the very top of the ESG scoring list is, believe it or not, Bill Gates founded Microsoft.
With these metrics, the business world will finally be able to walk the talk on their commitment to ESG performance and the stakeholder principle.
Recently, I rejected a request from my investors to report ESG metrics for my startup. But according to Klaus Schwab, I may soon have no choice.
As regulators look set to mandate separate sustainability reporting requirements, we encourage all companies to join the forum's Stakeholder Capitalism Metrics Initiative.
This mandate call to action is led by this middle stakeholder, the former UK Prime Minister.
We're announcing the UK's intention to mandate climate disclosures by large companies and financial services firms across the economy by 2025.
By the end of 2023, the UK and several other countries had mandated large company environmental reporting.
And the UK, EU and Australia have announced reporting could be made mandatory for all companies this year.
Introduced to score companies, China's corporate credit system now scores everyone. Their notorious social credit system is a stark warning for where ESG may be headed.
The state will go over every detail of a person's life with a fine-tooth comb, their financial situation, spending habits, career, even behaviour on social media. Criticising the government online is a no-no.
As with the ESG score, the Chinese social credit system forces compliance by punishing people who break the government's rules.
When Xiaowen Wang makes an electronic payment, her purchases tell the state a lot about her. Buying cigarettes would count against her. She'd be better off buying water. The cinema names and shames people considered untrustworthy, plastering their details, even their addresses, across big screens.
In a country that's banned over 20 million people from travelling for having a low score, you don't want to disrespect the government.
The Supreme Court has created a blacklist for so-called bad citizens. On it are companies, but also 23 million people to date. Among them is this journalist Liu Hu. He got a little too close to uncovering corruption among high-profile party members.
Once you're blacklisted, you can no longer get a bank loan, start a business, buy an apartment, or even send your children to a private school.
And it's not just our human rights we should be concerned about. Since 1900, communist governments have killed 100 million citizens, with many of those victims being in China over the past century.
Between 1960 and 1962, 30 million people died from starvation during the so-called Great Leap Forward. During China's 10-year shift to communism from 1966, Mao indoctrinated the young working class to rise up and attack anyone who favoured capitalism, resulting in millions murdered. In 1989, thousands of human rights protesters were massacred by tanks and heavily armed troops in Tiananmen Square.
China is an example of how citizens become oppressed when a nation transitions away from free market capitalism.
Today, Xi Jinping is leading an Orwellian campaign of control and intimidation, using the media to brainwash citizens.
China's lockdown on free speech and dissent is still in full force. Journalists are being arrested and newspapers forced to censor or close down.
Due to the Marxist ideology opposing all forms of religion, over 1 million Uyghurs and other Chinese Muslims are currently being tortured and often killed in re-education camps designed to erase religion throughout China.
Lessons are watched over by police, carrying shields, batons and handcuffs. And the documents describe the response to students who attempt to escape. If warning shots are ignored, the order's clear: shoot them dead.
The police who torture and murder fellow citizens are just normal people who have become indoctrinated by their government to commit these horrific crimes.
Were the suspects all men?
Men and women.
Kick them, beat them bruised and swollen, knock their heads on the radiator,
Police would step on the suspect's face and tell him to confess.
He was raped by Chinese prisoners who followed the orders of prison guards.
The police there ordered me to take off my underwear and let me
and bend over.
This. I cried. Please don't do this.
If you want people to confess, you use the electric baton. We would tie 2 electrical wires on the tips and set the wires on their genitals.
For many Chinese prisoners of conscience, torture and the risk of being murdered is more preferable than the punishment for confessing to the crime of having a religious belief.
Just for growing a beard, Tursun Kadir was sentenced to 16 years in jail. Many others have been jailed for listening to illegal religious lectures, including Tursun Memtimin and Ashigul Turgan. The documents don't say whether their daughters have been sent, like so many others, to the state-run boarding schools built alongside the camps.
He insists he can forgive the men who jailed and tortured him.
I don't hate them, because all of them victim of that system.
Based upon that system, and in partnership with the person who controls it, Klaus Schwab has enacted a global transition to stakeholder capitalism.
Today is a milestone in implementing the stakeholder principle into the management of companies.
A system that provides the stakeholders with a terrifying amount of control.
It's a burst of taking care of all the different stakeholders.
You need to commit to stakeholder capitalism. You need to commit to being net zero.
Our governments have been captured by communism.
We are being transitioned, undemocratically, to an authoritarian political system and manipulated with ideas that tyrants propagate when shifting nations to communism.
Treason is defined as
the offence of attempting to overthrow the government of the state to which the offender owes allegiance, or of betraying the state into the hands of a foreign power.
Our government leaders are committing treason, which carries a maximum sentence of life imprisonment.
In the next episode, I learn how Klaus Schwab indoctrinated aspiring politicians with his inclusive and sustainable ideas and placed them into positions of power.
When I mention now names like Mrs. Merkel, even Vladimir Putin and so on, they all have been young global leaders of the World Economic Forum.
I expose Schwab's 10-year plan for transitioning us to stakeholder capitalism.
We have to prepare for a more angry world. I see the need for action. I see the need for a great reset.
Which includes a catastrophic jobs crisis.
The unemployment, and the impact on livelihoods. About 50% of people in the world will be affected.
And I investigate the stakeholders' Build Back Better propaganda campaign that they designed to get us on board with the great reset of capitalism.
Build back better.
Build back better.
Build back better.
Building back better.
Build back better.
Build back better.
Build back better.
Build it back better.
Building this country back better.
We are driving a campaign to stop our transition to stakeholder capitalism.
Our transition to stakeholder capitalism will only stop when the majority of us reject it, so please help us create more awareness.
To watch the next episode and discover how you can help, visit yellow.forum.